Black woman stops robbery at diner. Patrons learn she's a kung fu master. The glass coffee pot shattered against the linoleum floor, its dark contents spraying across worn boots and pristine white sneakers. The diner fell silent except for the oldies' music crackling through speakers that had seen better days. A man in a dark hoodie stood at the register, gun trembling in his right hand, while his left reached for the cash that Doris, the 63-year-old waitress, reluctantly pushed toward him. "Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt," he repeated, voice cracking. His eyes darted nervously around the room, settling momentarily on each patron. The truck driver hunched over his meatloaf, the young couple sharing a milkshake, the businessman on his laptop, and the middle-aged black woman sitting alone at the counter, slowly setting down her coffee mug. "Just take it and go," Doris pleaded, her weathered hands shaking. The robber stuffed bills into his pocket, but his nervousness was escalating. The gun now pointed wildly around the room. "Phones and wallets on the tables, now." The patrons complied, all except the woman at the counter. She remained perfectly still, her eyes focused on the gunman with an unsettling calmness. "Hey, you deaf, phone and wallet." The gun was now pointed directly at her head. She spoke softly, yet her voice carried throughout the silent diner. "You don't want to do this." Her accent was subtle, hinting at origins beyond this small Midwestern town. "Lady, don't be a hero. It never ends well for heroes." "I'm not being a hero," she replied, her voice remaining even. "I'm offering you a choice." The moment hung in the air, a crossroads between violence and redemption, between what seems necessary and what is right. The woman's unwavering gaze held not just determination, but something else, compassion, perhaps. It was a moment that challenged assumptions about power, about who holds it, and how it should be used. No one in that diner could have predicted what would happen next, or how this single moment would transform their understanding of the strangers they share spaces with every day. Eliza Morgan had been coming to Hank's diner every Thursday evening for nearly 6 months. She always ordered the same thing, black coffee and a slice of sweet potato pie, and always sat in the same spot at the counter, third stool from the end. She'd arrived just after the dinner rush, when the place was quiet enough for her to grade papers or read. The staff knew little about her beyond the fact that she'd moved to Millfield last year to teach history at the community college. She was polite but reserved, never quite joining in the easy banter that flowed around the diner. Some took her quietness for aloofness, others for shyness. Few had made any real effort to know more. Tonight was different. Tonight her usual booth was taken by a family of 4, forcing her to sit at the counter. And tonight she'd left her grading at home, bringing instead a worn, leather-bound journal that she occasionally wrote in between sips of coffee. "Warm you up, hun?" Doris asked, coffee pot in hand. "Please," Eliza replied with a small smile. "How's your grandson doing with those college applications?" Doris brightened. "James got accepted to state, full ride for engineering. That boy always was smart with his hands." "That's wonderful, Doris. You must be very proud." "Oh, I am. First in our family to go to college. His mama, my daughter, she would have been so proud too." Doris's eyes misted slightly as she poured the coffee. At the opposite end of the counter sat Ray Thompson, Millfield's self-appointed town historian and notorious gossip. He was in his 70s, a retired postal worker who spent his days collecting stories and spreading them with equal enthusiasm. "You know, you don't look like a regular history teacher," he called down to Eliza, loud enough that several heads turned. Eliza glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. "And what does a regular history teacher look like, Mr. Thompson?" "Tweedy, spectacles, old white men with beards mostly." He chuckled at his own assessment. Eliza turned back to her journal. Perhaps that's why history keeps repeating itself. Across the diner, a young couple, Zach and Taylor, shared a booth and a chocolate milkshake with 2 straws. College students home for break, they'd been high school sweethearts, now navigating the complexities of a long-distance relationship. "I'm just saying maybe we should see other people," Zach was saying, his voice low. "It's not working, Tay. We're in different states, different lives." Taylor stirred the milkshake absently. "So 3 years means nothing. Just like that, we're done." Near the window, Marcus Chen, a business consultant passing through town on his way to a conference in Chicago, typed furiously on his laptop. He'd stopped only because his rental car had a warning light, and the mechanic had said it would take an hour to check out. He'd chosen Hank's simply because it had Wi-Fi and was within walking distance of the garage. At a corner table sat Liam O'Neill, a long-haul trucker who made it a point to stop at Hank's whenever his route took him through Millfield. His massive frame hunched over a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The food wasn't exceptional, but it was consistent, and after 15 years on the road, Liam had learned to value consistency. Behind the counter, beyond the swinging kitchen doors, Hank himself worked the grill. At 68, he was considering retirement, but couldn't imagine a life away from the diner he'd built from nothing 40 years ago. His son had no interest in taking over. He was a software engineer in Seattle, and Hank couldn't bear the thought of selling to strangers. The bell above the door jingled, and a young man entered. He was maybe in his early 20s, thin and pale, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm spring evening. He hesitated at the entrance, scanning the diner before moving to a small table near the restrooms. Doris approached him with a menu and a smile. "Evening, hun. Just yourself tonight." The young man nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Just coffee." "You sure? Kitchen's open till 9. We make a mean meatloaf on Thursdays." "Just coffee," he repeated more firmly this time. Doris shrugged and returned to the counter to fill his order. As she passed Eliza, she muttered, "Jumpy one, isn't he? Hope he's not on something." Eliza glanced at the young man, noting the way his leg bounced nervously under the table, how his eyes kept darting to the register, to the door, to his watch. "He's afraid," she said quietly. "Afraid of what?" Before Eliza could answer, the kitchen timer dinged, and Doris moved to retrieve a pie from the oven. The diner settled back into its gentle rhythm, the clinking of silverware, murmured conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from Ray as he regaled a captive audience with tales of Millfield's past. Outside, the sun had set, casting the parking lot in shadows. The neon, open sign buzzed in the window, and passing cars occasionally illuminated the interior with sweeping headlights. It was the kind of ordinary evening that usually blended seamlessly into the fabric of small-town life, unremarkable and comforting in its predictability. No one noticed when the young man in the hoodie slipped into the restroom, or when he emerged 5 minutes later with a different look in his eyes, harder, more desperate. No one except Eliza, who closed her journal and tucked it into her bag, her movements deliberate and unhurried. The moment that would change everything was approaching, as inevitable as the turning of the earth. Jake Harris hadn't planned on becoming a robber. 6 months ago, he'd been a community college student with decent grades and a part-time job at the local hardware store. Then his mother's cancer came back, worse than before. The medical bills piled up faster than the insurance would cover. His hours at the store got cut. The final straw came when their landlord served an eviction notice. They were 3 months behind on rent. He'd tried everything legitimate first. Extra shifts, payday loans, selling his car, but it wasn't enough, not nearly enough. His mother needed an experimental treatment the insurance wouldn't cover, and the hospital wanted payment up front. Tonight wasn't his first robbery. It was his third. The first two had been late-night convenience stores in neighboring towns. Quick in, quick out. No one hurt. Just enough cash to keep the eviction at bay for another month. But it wasn't enough for the treatment. Hank's diner wasn't an ideal target, too many witnesses, but Jake was desperate. The treatment was scheduled for Monday, and he needed $5,000 by tomorrow. The diner's Thursday night register, plus whatever he could get from the customers, might get him close. In the bathroom, he'd psyched himself up, repeating the mantra that had gotten him through the previous robberies. "It's just money. Insurance will cover it. No one gets hurt if everyone stays calm." But standing at the register now, gun in hand, a gun he'd never fired, borrowed from a cousin who didn't ask questions, Jake felt his control slipping. His hands were sweaty, his vision tunneling. The elderly waitress looked terrified, and that made him feel like a monster. "Hurry up." He snapped, harsher than he'd intended. The woman at the counter, the one who wouldn't put her phone on the table, was watching him with unnerving intensity. There was something in her eyes that cut through his adrenaline-fueled haze. Not fear, not anger, something else. "I said, put your phone on the table," he repeated, pointing the gun directly at her. She didn't flinch. "My phone is in my bag," she said calmly, "but I don't think that's what you really want." "Don't tell me what I want." The gun was shaking now. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're afraid," she replied. "I know this isn't who you are." Jake felt a surge of anger. Who was this woman to judge him, to act like she knew his situation? "Shut up, just shut up and do what I say." "Or what?" she asked, her voice still maddeningly calm. "You'll shoot me? Is that who you want to be? A killer?" The diner was dead silent. No one moved. Even the music seemed to have stopped, though the ancient jukebox continued to spin in the corner. "You don't understand," Jake said, his voice cracking. "I need the money. My mom—" "Cancer," Eliza said simply. "Stage 4, the treatments are expensive and insurance won't cover all of it." Jake froze. "How did you— Your mother is Diane Harris. She taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. The community did a fundraiser last month, but it wasn't enough. You're her son, Jake." The shock of hearing his name, of being recognized, sent a jolt through Jake's system. His grip on the gun tightened reflexively. Across the diner, Liam, the truck driver, slowly began to ease out of his booth if he could just get close enough. "Don't," Eliza said sharply without taking her eyes off Jake. "Please stay where you are, sir. This situation doesn't need physical intervention." Liam hesitated, then slowly sat back down. Marcus, the businessman, had been surreptitiously reaching for his phone under the table. "That goes for you too," Eliza added. "No phones, not yet." Jake was becoming increasingly agitated. This wasn't going according to plan. The woman knew who he was. She knew about his mother. Everything was falling apart. "I need everyone's wallets and phones now, or I swear you'll what, Jake?" Eliza's voice had changed. There was an edge to it now, commanding rather than just calm. "Think very carefully about your next move." Something in her tone made Jake pause. He'd never shot a gun before, never hurt anyone. Did he really have it in him to pull the trigger? The coffee pot that Doris had been holding slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the floor, the crash like a gunshot in the tense silence. Jake startled, his finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses would give conflicting accounts. One moment Eliza was seated at the counter. The next, she was in motion, fluid, precise, almost beautiful in its efficiency. Her hand struck Jake's wrist with a sharp chop, numbing his fingers. The gun clattered to the floor. Before he could react, she had twisted his arm behind his back and pinned him face down on the counter, using leverage rather than brute force to immobilize him. "I'm sorry it came to this," she said quietly, close to his ear. "But I couldn't let you make a mistake you'd never come back from." The entire takedown had taken less than 3 seconds. The diner erupted in chaos, gasps, shouts, someone applauding briefly before awkward silence fell again. Ray Thompson found his voice first. "Holy hell, did you see that? She moved like Bruce Lee or something." Eliza ignored him, keeping Jake secured but not hurting him. "Doris, would you please call the police? And Hank, could you bring some ice?" "I think Jake's wrist is sprained." Hank, who had emerged from the kitchen at the sound of the breaking coffee pot, stood frozen in shock. Sure thing," he finally managed, disappearing back through the swinging doors. Jake had stopped struggling. Tears streamed down his face as the adrenaline ebbed, replaced by the crushing reality of what he'd done and what he'd almost done. "I just wanted to help her," he sobbed. "The doctors said this treatment could give her more time." "I know," Eliza said, her voice gentle again. "But this wasn't the way." As they waited for the police, a strange quiet fell over Hank's diner. The patrons stared at Eliza with new eyes, seeing for the first time the woman who had been in their midst all along, hidden in plain sight, her true nature revealed in a moment of crisis. Who was she really? And what else didn't they know about the strangers they saw every day? The police arrived within minutes, 2 patrol cars, lights flashing but sirens silent. In a town like Millfield, an armed robbery was a rare event. Officer Dave Mendez, who'd been with the department for 15 years, took charge of the scene, while his younger partner, Officer Sarah Lynn, secured the gun and began taking statements. Jake offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to the patrol car. He looked broken, defeated. As he passed Eliza, he paused. "How did you know about my mom?" "I volunteer at the hospital twice a week," she replied. Diane mentioned her son Jake was working extra shifts to help with the bills. "She's very proud of you." Jake's face crumpled. "She's gonna be so disappointed." "Yes," Eliza agreed, not sugarcoating it, "but she'll still love you. That's what mothers do." After Jake was secured in the patrol car, Officer Mendez approached Eliza. "Ma'am, I need to ask you a few questions about how you subdued the suspect." Eliza nodded. "Of course. That move you used, that wasn't just lucky. You've had training." It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. "Yes. Mind telling me what kind?" Before she could respond, Ray Thompson interjected from his seat at the counter. "Kung Fu had to be Kung Fu, the way she moved. Classic Wing Chun technique, if I'm not mistaken." Officer Mendez raised an eyebrow. "Is that right, ma'am?" Eliza sighed. "It's more complicated than that, but yes, martial arts training was involved." "Where'd you learn something like that? Army, police academy?" "China," she said simply. "I studied there for nearly 20 years. This revelation sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the diner. Eliza Morgan, the quiet history professor who kept to herself, had spent 2 decades in China studying martial arts. It seemed impossible. Marcus, the businessman, closed his laptop and approached. "Excuse me, but did you say China, as in the People's Republic of China?" Eliza nodded. "May I ask where? I do business in Shanghai occasionally." "I began in Beijing, but spent most of my time in a small village in the Wudang Mountains." Marcus's eyes widened. "Wudang, that's the birthplace of Tai Chi, the seat of Taoist martial arts tradition." Ray slapped the counter in triumph. "I knew it, Kung Fu master." "I'm not a master," Eliza corrected. "I was a dedicated student." Officer Lin, who had been taking notes, looked up. If I may ask, Ms. Morgan, why did you intervene? That was incredibly dangerous. He had a gun. The diner fell silent, all eyes on Eliza. It was the question they'd all been wondering, why risk her life for a diner full of strangers? Eliza considered her words carefully. In the traditions I studied, there's a concept called wu-wei action through non-action. The ideal is to resolve conflict with the minimum necessary force. I observed Jake carefully. His finger was off the trigger guard. His stance was unbalanced. The gun was poorly maintained, the slide was sticking. I assessed that he wasn't likely to fire accidentally, and I could disarm him with minimal risk. That's very analytical, Officer Lin noted. My teachers would say I'm still thinking too much, Eliza replied with a small smile. But there's another reason. I recognized that Jake was a good person in a desperate situation. I didn't want him to cross a line he couldn't come back from. Doris, who had been sweeping up the broken glass, paused. You mean killing someone? Not just that. Sometimes the smaller steps threatening innocent people, causing fear those can change a person too. They make the bigger steps easier. I wanted to give Jake a chance to find another path. Hank emerged from the kitchen with a pot of fresh coffee. On the house, everyone. After what we've been through, I think we could all use it. As Doris began pouring cups, the atmosphere in the diner gradually shifted. The initial shock and fear gave way to a strange, shared intimacy, the kind that often follows a collective trauma. People who had been strangers an hour ago now exchanged looks of mutual understanding, bound by the experience they'd shared. Zach and Taylor, the young couple who had been discussing breaking up, sat closer together now, hands intertwined on the table. Near tragedy had a way of clarifying what really mattered. Liam, the truck driver, approached Eliza awkwardly. I was going to try to jump him, he admitted. Probably would have got myself shot. Your instinct to help was admirable, Eliza replied, but in that situation, timing and technique are everything. Could you? Liam hesitated, looking embarrassed. Could you show me how you did that, the wrist thing? Eliza considered him for a moment. It's not something you can learn in 5 minutes. It takes years of practice to develop the sensitivity and precision. Oh, right, of course. Liam looked disappointed. But, she added, I could show you a simple defensive move that might be useful someday, one that doesn't require strength or speed, just proper leverage. Liam's face brightened. I'd like that. As Eliza demonstrated a basic wrist escape to Liam, others in the diner watched with fascination. Ray peppered her with questions about China and martial arts, which she answered patiently but without elaboration. The police finished taking statements and preparing to leave. Officer Mendez approached Eliza one last time. Ms. Morgan, will need you to come to the station tomorrow to complete your statement. Of course. And, thank you, what you did was risky, but you probably prevented a tragedy. Not everyone would have had the courage to step in like that. After the police left, taking Jake with them, a strange quiet settled over the diner. The routine of normal life seemed impossible to return to after what had happened. Yet there was coffee to be poured, food to be served, conversations to be had. Marcus, who had been observing Eliza with growing interest, finally approached her. Ms. Morgan, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what brought you to Millfield? After 20 years in China, this seems like quite a change. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Why would someone with her training and experience choose this small, unremarkable town? What was she running from or toward? Eliza met his gaze steadily. Sometimes the most profound journeys are the ones that bring us home to ourselves. It was a non-answer, and everyone knew it. But they also sensed that Eliza Morgan's story was far more complex than they had imagined, and that tonight had only scratched the surface of who she really was. The following day, Hank's diner was busier than usual. Word had spread quickly about the attempted robbery and the mysterious woman who had stopped it. People came as much for the gossip as for the food, hoping to catch a glimpse of Eliza Morgan Millfield's newly discovered kung fu master, as Ray Thompson had enthusiastically dubbed her. But Eliza didn't show. She gave her statement at the police station in the morning, then returned to her small apartment above the bookstore on Main Street. She needed time to think, to process. Her carefully constructed privacy had been breached, and she wasn't sure how to proceed. That evening, as she was grading papers, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Hank standing awkwardly in the hallway, a paper bag in his hands. Sweet potato pie, he explained, holding up the bag. Thought you might be missing your usual Thursday slice. Eliza smiled. That's very kind of you, Hank. Would you like to come in? Her apartment was simply furnished, but with careful attention to detail. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with history texts and biographies. A small altar sat in one corner with incense, a few stones, and a single photograph of an elderly Chinese man with kind eyes. Nice place, Hank said, taking a seat at her small kitchen table. Quiet. I appreciate quiet, Eliza replied, setting out plates for the pie. Listen, Hank began, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. You saved my diner, maybe saved lives. Anyone would have helped if they could. Hank shook his head. No, they wouldn't. Most people freeze up in situations like that, or they think about themselves first. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Ray's been talking nonstop about you being some kind of secret kung fu master. Eliza sighed. Ray has an active imagination. Maybe, but what you did, that wasn't beginner's luck. No, she admitted, it wasn't. The thing is, Hank continued, people are curious, they're asking questions. And in a town like Millfield, questions don't go unanswered for long, Eliza finished for him. Exactly, so I thought maybe you'd want to get ahead of the rumors, tell your story your way. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. My story isn't as exciting as people might hope. I doubt that very much, Hank replied with a gentle smile. She served the pie and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Eliza spoke. I was 19 when I first went to China. It was supposed to be a semester abroad. I was studying history at Northwestern. But I met Master Chen at a cultural demonstration and something connected. She glanced at the photograph on the altar. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He offered to teach me, and I stayed. For 20 years? Hank asked, amazed. It wasn't the plan, but 1 year became 2, then 5, then 10. Time moves differently in the mountains. The training became my life. What kind of training exactly? Taoist martial arts, meditation, philosophy, medicine, it's all connected in that tradition, the physical inseparable from the spiritual and intellectual. And you became a master, Eliza smiled. In Chinese tradition, mastery is a lifelong pursuit. I was a dedicated student, nothing more. Then why leave after all that time? Her expression grew distant. Master Chen died 3 years ago. Without him, the school changed. New leadership, new priorities. And I began to feel that I needed to bring what I'd learned back into the world, to test it in everyday life, not just in the protected environment of the school. So you chose Millfield, not exactly a hotbed of philosophical discourse or martial arts enthusiasm. I chose a place where I could be anonymous, where I could observe ordinary life without preconceptions. She smiled faintly. I may have underestimated small-town curiosity, Hank laughed. Just a bit. He finished his pie and set down his fork. So what now? Will you keep teaching at the community college? If they'll have me, though I suspect my office hours might suddenly become very popular. You know, Hank said thoughtfully, there's an empty storefront next to the diner. It used to be a yoga studio before Mindful Movements relocated to the new strip mall. I own the building. Eliza raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I open a kung fu school? Maybe not kung fu exactly. But from what I saw yesterday, you have skills that could help people. Self-defense, confidence, focus. This town could use more of all those things. I'm not sure, just think about it, Hank said, rising to leave. Rent would be reasonable for the first year, and after yesterday, you'd have students lined up around the block. After Hank left, Eliza sat at her window, looking out at the quiet street below. Millfield had been a temporary stop in her journey, a place to observe and reflect before moving on. She hadn't planned on connecting with the community, on being known, but plans change. Sometimes the path reveals itself only when you're forced to depart from your intended route. Her phone buzzed with a text from Doris. You've got fans at the diner. Ray's told your story to everyone who will listen and plenty who won't. When are you coming back for pie? Eliza smiled despite herself. Privacy had its value, but so did community. Perhaps it was time to find a balance between the two. A week after the attempted robbery, life in Millfield had seemingly returned to normal with one significant change. Eliza Morgan was no longer the anonymous history professor. She had become a local celebrity of sorts, with people stopping her on the street to shake her hand or ask questions about her time in China. She handled the attention with grace but maintained healthy boundaries. Yes, she had studied martial arts in China. No, she couldn't teach anyone to fight in 5 minutes. Yes, she was still teaching history at the community college. Jake Harris had been charged with attempted armed robbery but was released on bail pending trial. His mother's condition had worsened, and the judge had taken the circumstances into consideration. To everyone's surprise, anonymous donations had covered Diane Harris's experimental treatment. No one knew who the donors were, but speculation ran rampant. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the incident, Eliza returned to Hank's diner. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and all conversation momentarily ceased. Then Doris called out, "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," and the tension broke. Eliza took her usual seat at the counter, third stool from the end. Doris immediately brought her coffee and sweet potato pie without being asked. The house, Doris insisted. Least we can do. Ray Thompson was in his usual spot, and he wasted no time moving to the stool next to Eliza. Been doing some research on those Wudang mountains you mentioned, he said without preamble. Fascinating stuff. Sacred mountains, Taoist temples. Zhang Sanfeng supposedly invented Tai Chi there in the 12th century. Eliza nodded. The historical records are somewhat unclear, but that's the tradition. So what style did you study? Chen, Yang, Wu? My training was eclectic. Master Chen believed in adapting traditional forms to the individual, not forcing the individual to conform to rigid styles. Ray looked disappointed. But surely there's a name for what you do? Eliza considered this. My teacher called it listening with the body. The technique is less important than the awareness behind it. At a nearby table, Liam, the truck driver, was having dinner. He delayed his route specifically to return to Hank's on Thursday, hoping to see Eliza again. When there was a lull in Ray's questioning, Liam approached. Ms. Morgan, I tried that wrist escape you showed me, been practicing all week. And it's harder than it looks, he admitted with a sheepish grin. My wife thinks I'm crazy, twisting my own arm in the bathroom mirror. Eliza smiled. It takes time. The body needs to learn the movement until it becomes instinct. Would you? I mean, if you're not too busy, could you show me again, maybe fix what I'm doing wrong? Before Eliza could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. Marcus Chen entered, looking considerably less harried than he had a week ago. He spotted Eliza and made his way to the counter. Ms. Morgan, I'm glad I caught you. I was hoping we might talk. It seems everyone wants to talk to Ms. Morgan tonight, Ray observed, not bothering to hide his annoyance at the interruption. Marcus ignored him. I've been in Chicago all week for my conference, but I couldn't stop thinking about what happened here, about what you did. It wasn't as extraordinary as people seem to think, Eliza replied. I disagree. I've spent considerable time in China for business. I've seen demonstrations by supposed masters that weren't half as effective as what you did. Marcus lowered his voice. I also made some inquiries about Wudang Mountain and a Master Chen who might have had a Western student for many years. Eliza's expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, alert, cautious. The Chen I found reference to was Chen Wangting, a highly respected teacher who rarely accepted foreign students. His school was known for combining philosophical principles with practical application martial arts as a path to spiritual development rather than combat. You've done your homework, Eliza acknowledged. I'm thorough in all my endeavors, Marcus replied. But here's what's interesting. Chen Wangting was also an advisor to several high-level government officials. His students often went on to positions of significant influence, not the kind of connection one simply walks away from. The implication hung in the air between them. Ray and Liam, sensing the conversation had taken a serious turn, discreetly stepped back. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Chen? Eliza asked, her voice cool. Nothing sinister, Marcus assured her. Only that there might be more to your story than a simple pursuit of martial arts knowledge, perhaps diplomatic connections, security services. You've been watching too many spy movies, Eliza said with a slight smile. The reality is much more mundane. I was a student, then a teacher. Now I'm a history professor in a small town. No conspiracy, no hidden agenda. Marcus studied her face, looking for tells. Then why Millfield, of all places? Before Eliza could answer, the door opened again, and Jake Harris entered the diner with a young woman supporting him. His mother, Diane, looked frail but determined, a colorful scarf covering her hair loss from treatments. The diner fell silent. Jake hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with all eyes on him. Then Diane spotted Eliza and made her way directly to the counter, guiding Jake alongside her. Professor Morgan, she said, her voice weak but steady. I needed to thank you in person. Eliza stood. Mrs. Harris, how are you feeling? Better than expected. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about the treatment. Diane squeezed Jake's arm. My son has told me what happened, what he did, and what you did. Jake couldn't meet Eliza's eyes. Mom, maybe we shouldn't know, Jake. This needs to be said. Diane turned back to Eliza. You could have let him be shot by police, or you could have hurt him badly when you stopped him. Instead, you showed restraint, compassion even. And then her voice broke slightly. Then someone anonymously paid for my entire treatment course, $60,000. Murmurs rippled through the diner. This was news to most of the patrons. That's wonderful, Eliza said. You have a guardian angel. A guardian angel who knew exactly how much the treatment cost, Diane replied meaningfully. A guardian angel who perhaps spent time in China, where traditional medicine values forgiveness and second chances. Eliza's expression revealed nothing. The world works in mysterious ways sometimes. Jake finally looked up. Why would you help us after what I did? If I did such a thing, Eliza said carefully, it might be because I believe people shouldn't be defined by their worst moments, that sometimes good people make desperate choices when systems fail them. I'm still facing charges, Jake said. The DA is pushing for jail time. As actions have consequences, Eliza acknowledged. But how we respond to those consequences defines our character. Diane reached out and took Eliza's hand. Whatever happens with the legal system, you've given us both a second chance. Jake at redemption, me at more time. I don't know how to repay that. Live well, Eliza said simply. That's repayment enough. The Harris family found a quiet table in the corner, away from curious eyes. The regular rhythm of the diner slowly resumed, coffee being poured, orders taken, conversations continuing. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. The story had deepened, layers revealed beneath layers. Marcus returned to his seat at the counter beside Eliza. $60,000 is a lot of money for a community college professor, he observed quietly. It would be, Eliza agreed, if I were the donor. You know what I find most interesting about all this? Marcus continued. Not the martial arts or the mysterious past in China. It's that you've created this careful distance between yourself and everyone here, yet you risked everything to help a young man you barely knew. Eliza sipped her coffee, considering her response. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to maintain distance and when to close it. A very Taoist perspective, Marcus noted with a smile. Balance in all things. Indeed. Marcus pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. I come through this area every few months for work. Perhaps next time we could continue this conversation somewhere quieter. Eliza glanced at the card but didn't pick it up. Perhaps. As Marcus left, Hank emerged from the kitchen and approached Eliza. Have you thought about my offer, the storefront? I have, Eliza replied. And I'm curious, why are you so interested in having me teach? Hank leaned against the counter. This town, it's changing, not always for the better, kids with nowhere to go after school. Opioid problems creeping in from the cities, people losing connection with each other, with themselves. What you know, it's not just about fighting, it's about discipline, purpose, community. We could use more of that around here. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. I'll consider it, but I'd need to maintain my teaching position at the college. History matters too. Of course, Hank agreed readily. We could work around your schedule. As they discussed possibilities, other patrons listened with growing interest. Ray Thompson naturally appointed himself spokesperson. I'd sign up, he declared. Never too old to learn something new. Me too, Liam added. Next time I'm through town. And me, said Doris, surprising everyone. These old bones could use some limbering up. And me, came a quiet voice from the corner. Jake Harris stood, his mother watching him with a mixture of concern and pride. If that would be allowed, part of making amends. The diner held its collective breath, waiting for Eliza's response. She studied Jake thoughtfully. The path of redemption is never easy, but it is always available to those willing to walk it with sincerity. Zach and Taylor, the young couple who had been about to break up the week before, exchanged glances. Would you teach couples? Taylor asked. We could use some balance. One by one, others expressed interest. The school librarian who ate breakfast at Hank's every morning, the UPS driver who stopped for lunch twice a week, even the mayor who occasionally held informal meetings in the corner booth. Eliza looked around at these people, no longer strangers but not quite friends. People whose lives had intersected with hers in ways she never could have anticipated when she chose Millfield as her quiet retreat from the world. The first principle of Taoist philosophy, she said finally, is that life moves in cycles, expansion and contraction, engagement and withdrawal. Perhaps it's time for a new cycle to begin. The atmosphere in the diner lightened, a sense of possibility filling the space where fear had reigned just a week before. Out of crisis had come connection, tenuous still, but real. As conversations flowed around her, Eliza felt a familiar sensation, the subtle shift that occurs when one chapter ends and another begins. She had come to Millfield seeking anonymity, a place to observe life from a distance. Instead, she had found herself at the center of a community in transition, her carefully constructed boundaries dissolving in the face of human need. It wasn't the path she had planned. But as her teacher had often reminded her, the path reveals itself only to those willing to take the first step without knowing the destination. The bell above the door jingled as new customers entered the diner. Life continued its eternal cycle. And in that small corner of the world, something new was taking root: connection, possibility, hope. Perhaps Millfield needed Eliza Morgan. Perhaps she was beginning to realize she needed Millfield too. If you enjoyed this story about hidden depths and the power of community, Please consider subscribing to At Persifistories for more moral tales that challenge assumptions and celebrate the complexity of human nature. How often do we misjudge others based on surface impressions? What hidden strengths might the strangers around us possess? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever discovered surprising depths in someone you thought you knew? Or has your community ever come together in unexpected ways during a crisis? Remember that, like Eliza, we all have the power to choose how we respond to life's challenges, with fear and isolation, or with courage and connection. Which path will you choose?